This is PediaCast.
Welcome to PediaCast, a pediatric podcast for parents. And now, direct from the campus of Nationwide Children's, here is your host, Dr. Mike.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to PediaCast. It is a pediatric podcast for moms and dads. This is Dr. Mike coming to you from the campus of Nationwide Children's Hospital. We're in Columbus, Ohio. It's episode 555. We're calling this one Sports Nutrition for Student Athletes. I want to welcome all of you to the program. So I hope you all have had a good week. Here in Central Ohio, and I would imagine in many parts of the United States, viral season has really ramped up as it usually does this time of year, except, in pandemic years and when social distancing makes everything go haywire. But in your typical year, which thankfully this is becoming a typical year, viral illnesses are really in high prevalence this time of year. And part of that is winter time. But why in the winter? Like, why do we see all of these viruses? And we don't exactly understand all of the reasons why, but one big thing is school. So you get, 20 kids in a classroom and they share their viruses with each other. And then they take those home, share them with their parents and their siblings, who then take them to their class or their work. And so because all of these kids are in close contact in a classroom, these things get spread so easily. And so if you find yourself with a runny nose, congestion, cough, maybe a fever with it, you are in good company. There is a lot of that going around right now. We do worry, for the young kids. If you have a baby at home who has a high fever, you definitely want to have them seen and checked out. For older kids, it's okay to let your body have a fever for a couple of days, especially if you're drinking well and going to the bathroom, several times during the day, so you're well hydrated. And then just taking ibuprofen and acetaminophen for the fever. If there's other symptoms that you're worried about, by all means, give your child's doctor a phone call. Let them know what symptoms they're having, and then they'll be able to tell you, hey, this is something you can treat at home. Maybe you need to come to the office. For instance, if you have a sore throat and not a lot of congestion, you may need a strep test. Or if it's after hours, they may say find a pediatric urgent care or find an emergency room. So, sometimes parents are like, where do we go? What do we do? And always the first thing is just give your doctor a phone call. There's someone's going to be on call for them, and you should be able to get a hold of someone at the office really 24/7. It may be an answering service, and they may say, hey, if it's not an emergency, doctor will call you back in the morning. That's appropriate. But it really is important to reach out to your regular physician. And then I also want to mention, each of these viruses typically last a week to 2 weeks sometimes. Now, usually the first week is worse, and then symptoms just kind of linger for another week after that. So, you get two viruses back to back, and you've got a kid who is sick for a month. And that is really not all that unusual. But again, if the fever's lasted more than a couple days, or the fever goes away and then comes back, that's going to be something that you want to have your child seen, because as we have talked about on this program before, viruses can then lead to bacterial infections as a complication. So what starts as a cold may turn into an ear infection or a pneumonia. In older kids, there may be a sinus infection. And so you really do want to pay attention to how long the fever is lasting and if it goes away and comes back. And of course, anytime your child's having difficulty breathing or you're worried they're getting dehydrated, it's definitely time to see someone. So as I said, you're in good company if you are dealing with all of this this time of the year, because this is when we see it. And this is when the offices and the emergency rooms and the urgent cares are particularly busy. So you'll probably have a longer wait. And that's just because, it's hard to predict exactly when these illnesses are going to spike. We know it's during the winter, but, sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later, and it can be hard to staff appropriately when things change so quickly. So please do have patience with your medical staff. They are working hard, I guarantee you, and really trying to get everybody as soon as and as fast as they can, but also providing really good quality care for each person and not rushing through and perhaps missing something. So that's all important things to keep in mind. So today is kind of a special day on PediaCast. As I mentioned, we are talking about sports nutrition for student athletes. Lots of topics to cover. We're going to discuss food as fuel, low energy availability, sports drinks, supplements, hormones, anabolic steroids. Why are those dangerous? Also, picky eaters. How do you keep them well fueled for sports? And injuries that can arise from poor nutrition. But what makes this episode super special is we have a co-host this week, Alycia Kingcade. She is a certified athletic trainer at Nationwide Children's Hospital and a podcast fanatic. She loves podcasts, and we are really excited to have her as a co-host. And she's going to join us for a few more episodes that we have lined up a little bit later in the year. Our guests today to talk about sports nutrition is Dr. Tom Pommering. He is Chief of Sports Medicine at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And Sakiko Minagawa, she is a sports dietitian at Nationwide Children's. Don't forget, you can find us wherever podcasts are found. And wherever you find us, please consider leaving a review about the program. We really do value those and want to certainly be the best podcast that we can be. And so the other thing that's nice with the reviews is that others who come along and are looking for a good program with evidence-based child health and parenting information, we want them to know that other people have enjoyed the podcast. So that's a really super helpful. Also, we're on social media. We love connecting with you there. We're on all the platforms. Just search for PediaCast and you should find us. And then over at PediaCast.org, we do have that contact page if you would like to suggest a future topic for the program. Also want to remind you the information presented in every episode of our podcast is for general educational purposes only. We do not diagnose medical conditions or formulate treatment plans for specific individuals. If you have a concern about your child's health, always call your healthcare provider. Also, your use of this audio program is subject to the PediaCast Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at PediaCast.org. So let's take a quick break. We'll get all the players settled into the studio, and then we will be back to talk about sports nutrition for student athletes. It's coming up right after this. Dr. Tom Pommering is Chief of Sports Medicine at Nationwide Children's Hospital and a professor of pediatrics at The Ohio State University College of Medicine. Sakiko Minagawa is a registered dietitian and nutrition expert with sports medicine at Nationwide Children's. They both have a passion for keeping student athletes healthy and performing at the top of their game, which includes the fuel that drives the body, otherwise known as food. That's what they're here to talk about today, sports nutrition. And we have a co-host joining us this week. Alycia Kingcade is a certified athletic trainer with sports medicine at Nationwide Children's. So first, let's give a warm PediaCast welcome to our guests, Dr. Tom Pommering and Sakiko Minagawa. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Always great to be here, Dr. Mike.
Thank you for having us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. We really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us. And then I also want to give a special welcome to our co-host this week, Alycia Kingcade. Again, she is an athletic trainer here at the hospital, and you are going to hear from her moving forward in the future. We plan on doing several of these episodes here in 2024. And so, Alycia, I just want to thank you for all of your hard work and getting us ready for this episode.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to be a co-host and be able to share about our sports medicine department and get to record future episodes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will go ahead and hand the reins over to you, Alycia, as we really get into it and talk about sports nutrition for student athletes.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone listening. Today, we are going to be talking about sports nutrition, like Dr. Mike had mentioned. And today, we'll discuss a few things that fall within sports nutrition, such as proper fueling, low energy availability, injuries caused by inadequate fueling, and even when to use appropriate sports supplement. So things come along with sports nutrition and sports. And so we just want to make sure that we give out the resources that we have and the information to educate to make sure that athletes are returning to sport well and are fueling well. So I wanted to start with asking Sakiko, You are a registered sports dietitian. I wanted to ask you, can you tell us what a registered sports dietitian is? And can you tell us what a typical day looks like for you?
Absolutely. So, first, a registered dietitian, or we can also go by registered dietitian nutritionist. We are a food and nutrition expert, and we have to meet certain criteria and earn the RDN credential. And I can kind of go through the steps. First, we have to earn an accredited bachelor's or master's degree. However, starting January 1st of 2024, all registered dietitian nutritionists requires a master's degree. We have to complete a dietetic internship and then pass the Commission on Dietetic Registration exam. And then some states require a state licensure, and the state of Ohio does. And then last, we have to maintain our state licensure and registration. In terms of a typical day, every day is a little bit different, but typically I do a one-on-one consult or one-on-two. Typically, I see the athlete and a parent or both of their parents, and kind of talk through their typical food and nutrition and hydration intake, and try to find areas where we can improve. I usually say, hey, let's make progress, not perfection, and find areas that we can improve our nutrition.
Awesome. Yes, Sakiko is a fantastic key factor of our sports medicine department, and she's a huge asset and comes out to the high schools and talks with our sports teams as well. So she's an incredible resource that we have, and I love learning from her as well. Sakiko, can you tell us, when working with athletes with restrictive diets and or picky eaters, how do you work around their specific needs to get their proper daily intake?
Yeah. So one thing I love about my job is I get to work with athletes. So I try to find areas where they might have motivation. And so for athletes, typically, right, they want to be a better athlete. So I kind of use that as a motivation to help them understand that, hey, food and hydration, that's the input you put into your body, and performance is the output. So we got to make sure we have the right food and nutrition and hydration, the input, so that we can get the most out of your body.
Thank you. Do you have any problems with these athletes fueling properly throughout the school day?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, school can also be helpful because it does create some structure in their day. But some schools start very early, and some kids have a hard time eating so early. So breakfast tends to be one of the most challenging part of proper fueling. We try to find some ways to overcome that. For example, I try to encourage athletes, hey, let's start somewhere. Maybe it's just a granola bar. Maybe it's, hey, if your parents drive you, maybe can you eat on the way to school? Or, hey, when you're at school, maybe can you eat something during your first period class? So breakfast tends to be challenging. School lunch can be challenging. Some kids love their school lunch. Some kids struggle with the school lunch. Sometimes I encourage athletes to pack their lunch. So yeah, that school lunch can be challenging. And depending on their school schedule, some kids have lunch at 9:30 a.m. Some kids have lunch at 1:30 p.m. So that trying to provide individualized nutrition recommendation based on their food likes, dislikes, as well as schedule is something that I love to do.
Dr. Pommering, when you're in clinic, when do you see nutrition come up in your exam?
Yeah, I think it comes up in different scenarios. Sometimes it comes up as part of a treatment for a condition such as a stress fracture. Sometimes parents will bring up the questions to us about their child is a picky eater, or questions about supplements, or sometimes, they might be in there for a joint injury, but I notice that they may have weight control issues. And then, we'll talk about it then. And I think, kind of to pick up on what Sakiko said, a good nutrition plan is like the secret sauce of kids performing well on the playground or in their sport or even in school, because, healthy bodies and healthy brains perform the best. So it really is an important part of just really good, healthy, active lifestyle.
What are signs of low energy availability, and what problems can this condition cause?
Yeah, so the most obvious sign of low energy availability will be in our female athletes who are having light or missed periods. So that's always a red flag for us. And that conversation usually comes up when we're treating someone for a stress fracture. And so other sort of more indirect signs would be, burnout, physical burnout, or emotional burnout with their sport, where they just don't have the energy or motivation to continue to train or be active. And so a lot of times, those will lead to wider conversations about their diet and their eating patterns, and then how it kind of affects their injury or the condition that we're taking care of.
If I can just jump in real quickly, Tom, I think that a lot of student athletes sort of look at missed periods as like a badge of honor. Like, I'm fit enough that my body doesn't need to have periods. And so I think there may be this misconception that not having periods while you're training or while you're performing is a good thing. But I think it's really important that folks understand, no, that just means that your body doesn't have enough extra energy to make periods, correct?
Yeah, great point, Mike. I mean, it's even a very convenient thing to have if you're training all the time, especially if you might be a swimmer. So I think that what athletes need to understand, and their parents, is that when you're missing periods for extended amounts of time, it's almost like it's the same as being in menopause. And that's very unhealthy for your bones. The bones, you have till you're about 25 to generate all the bone density that you're going to use for the rest of your life. And if you interrupt that precious time of bone building, and if you do it long enough, you will lose bone density. And sometimes it's very hard, if not impossible, to get it all back.
To add to that, I do get a lot of, hey, a lot of my friends, for female athletes, a lot of my friends lose their period during times of high activity. And so it's normal. And I often have to remind them, hey, just because it happens often doesn't mean it's okay. And that it is normal. It is not normal.
Yeah. So I think if listeners out there, this is something that's happening in your family, don't sweep it under the rug. Ask your regular doctor that you see, hey, I think we need to see a sports nutrition expert because, my daughter's not having her periods and we want to fuel her body in the best way possible. So parents out there who are listening, this is an area where you really can be an advocate for your kid, because they're unlikely to mention this and to bring it up because it may be embarrassing for them. And so I think it's really important as a parent to really address that issue head on and talk to somebody about it.
One more thing I do want to add, another pretty clear sign of low energy availability is weight loss, right? Especially for our young kids, they should still be growing, and not just growth in height, but also weight. And so, especially if kids go to their wild child visit from year to year, if we see a big drop in weight loss is a pretty clear sign that they're not fueled properly.
Yeah, I would just add one last thing just to kind of combat some of the folklore out there. You can have a normal menstrual status and still achieve good results in your training and competition. So I think sometimes people think it's one or the other, and it doesn't have to be that way and shouldn't.
I have one question for you both is how do you see that sleep is in conjunction with low energy availability and just not fueling properly? Like, how do you see sleep come up with that?
So I think, the way my discussion with the athletes who are training seriously or have high aspirations to be able to perform at a high level is you need three really good things. You need a really good, thoughtful training plan. You need a really good, thoughtful recovery plan, and you need a good nutrition plan. So I would put sleep into the realm of recovery. And again, there are a lot of reasons kids don't get great sleep these days. A lot of it's because they're overscheduled. But obviously, if there are other things that can be affecting their sleep, it's sort of an onion. You're going to peel back those layers, but it's really important. All three of those are, to me, is equally as important.
Within my sports nutrition consultation, I see a lot of athletes who are underfueled and struggle falling asleep because they're hungry, or they fall asleep and they wake up in the middle of the night because they're hungry or thirsty and have to eat during the middle of the night, and then they wake up and then they have poor sleep, so then they're not hungry, and so it's a pretty bad cycle of underfueling and poor sleep.
I feel like as a high school athletic trainer, I see a lot of sleep I see that sleep is working in conjunction with low fuel and not fueling properly. So from my perspective, in the high school setting specifically, I just see that there's a lot of kids that come in and they're really tired, or they say, and I ask them, what did you eat today? And then they said a granola bar or a cup of yogurt. And there's some sort of disconnect, and then they are not sleeping very well, kind of like you guys just said. So I see that from my perspective as being, they work together. and bank off of each other. So, Sakiko, when you're in clinic and you're working with an athlete, how do you address low energy availability with students and their families?
Yeah. So first, I like to make sure the athlete and the parents understand what it is, right? So I try to make it as easy to understand as possible. So I describe low energy availability as an imbalance, right, of how much you're putting into your body in terms of fuel and how much your body needs. And when we have this imbalance, I I kind of describe fueling like a cell phone, right? When we charge our cell phone, the battery charges. And same thing with our body. When we fuel our body battery charges. And throughout the day, if we're not fueling or eating enough, our body battery goes down and down and down. And just like our cell phone gives us a notification, right? When it's low battery, our body also starts to give us a notification. Like our stomach starts to growl, we feel lightheaded, we feel dizzy, we can't focus, we get hangry, right? All of those are signs that we're not eating enough. And so my way of using this analogy is to help athletes understand, hey, we need to charge our body by eating and fueling and hydrating throughout the day. And I like to focus on how when we don't eat enough, right, it affects not just how we feel today, but also our performance in terms of sports. And if we continue to do that for a long period of time, it increases your risk for injuries and illnesses, and it can affect your sports performance as well as the longevity of your sport, right? We want to make sure our athletes are healthy and strong, not just for this season of sport, but for next season as well as in the future. A good, healthy life involves physical activity. And if we're constantly hurt, or if we're hurt doing any forms of physical activity, right, that's not enjoyable. And so I like to talk about how I want athletes to feel strong and confident. And that requires us to make sure that you're fueling properly.
Sakiko, can you tell the listeners a little bit more about what sports drink is and how it's efficient, when to drink it or when to take it? Because I see a lot of kids drinking Celsius and even caffeine. And I think that it's just a snowball effect on top of not fueling properly or not enough. And then on top of not sleeping very much. And just explaining how sports drink works and how to get proper fuel.
Yeah. So I guess in general, like hydration, right? Hydration is extremely important. No matter how well we eat, if we're dehydrated, right, that's going to affect our health and sports performance. In terms of hydration, I think there is a time and place for sports drink. And usually I like to focus on sports drink as a hydration beverage when we're active, when we're sweating, when it's hot, humid condition, or during games or tournament when we're active for a long period of time. Usually we say greater than 60 minutes. In terms of hydration from energy drinks, I'm not a big fan of, right? We want to use food as our fuel, not energy drink or caffeine or whatever other ingredients that are in energy drinks that's supposedly supposed to give you energy. In terms of hydration from other methods, for example, fruits, soups, smoothies can be a great way to hydrate our body, but also give us a lot of great nutrients and calories, right? Especially for our athletes that are a higher risk for underfueling or low energy availability. I like to encourage hydrating through other methods that gives you calories as well, so that these athletes can get nutrition and hydration and energy through that way.
Yeah, I really like what you said about how food is first and then you can have other things. But I think that's the key part, is that we need to get our intake from food as the first part of fuel, and then things come later if okay, but hydration is also another key aspect as well, that I don't hydrate enough as much as I can. So, but it's one of those things that I think that needs to be put out more education wise.
So, Alycia, I might just add something about supplements that we get that question a lot from parents, asking if is it okay for their child to take supplements. Probably creatine is the most common. But the way I sort of frame this up is that, navigating the supplement world is like living in the Wild West, because the supplements are regulated by the FDA. So there's nothing to prove what you're getting is what they say you're getting. And so when that happens, The most benign problem is, what you're paying a lot of money for and putting in your body isn't giving you what it says it's going to give you. And the more dangerous potential is that it's giving you things you don't want to have in your supplements, cross-contamination with steroids or amphetamines, things like that. And so it is buyer beware, I think, when you're using supplements. There are a few independent bodies that manufacturers of supplements can voluntarily submit their product, and they can be approved or evaluated for pureness. The one that comes to mind for me is USP. I think Sakiko has several others that she mentions to us when she's educating our physician group. So if kids are going to enter into the supplement world, I at least ask them to consider getting products with those types of stamps of approval, so that that there's been some regulation and evaluation. But really, what Sakiko said is so true. Like, natural food is where you want to go. It's less expensive, it's more predictable, and it's really the safest way also to enhance your diet. And just the one last thing I would say about this: some of our athletes are competing at the elite level or international level, and what parents and athletes need to know is that you fall under the anti-doping regulations for that organization. And so if you unintentionally use a supplement that's been tainted and you test positive, in most circumstances, it's on the athlete. You're responsible for what goes into your body. So the last thing you want to do is train for, years and years of your life and get to a penultimate contest and find out your results are going to be negated, or you'll have penalties because of something you thought was okay to put in your body. So for those listeners whose kids are competing at that level, you just need to be aware of that as well.
Tom, can you just comment on the dangers of anabolic steroids and testosterone and the things that we are worried about cross-contamination, especially folks who think, well, I'm not in a sport where they're going to test me. There may be some student athletes out there who think, oh, I'm going to do better if I use these. Can you just comment on the dangers of those products?
Yeah, sure, Mike. So we see all types of different complications from using anabolic steroids. Things like you can have breast enhancement. For men, you can have testicular atrophy. You can get mood changes, which includes aggression. It raises your blood pressure. It can raise your cholesterol as well, and it can enhance acne. And then as far as injuries go, we'll see athletes tearing muscles that they shouldn't tear because they're lifting weights or doing things that their skeleton isn't really meant to support. So we'll see like pectoralis tears and things like that. So there's a lot of dangers with using steroids, both in the short term and the long term.
Yeah, I had reached out to some of our high school strength and conditioning coaches just to see what they had been hearing in the weight rooms about what kids are asking them is appropriate to take as far as protein, creatine, and those are some of the things that they had mentioned that they get asked about. And so I'm glad that you guys touched on that, because I know that that's a common thing that kids are wondering about and wondering when to take it, how much to take it, what types to take. And so I think that's a huge piece that parents could definitely benefit from knowing about, just because knowing what their kid should be taking. But the natural food is definitely the best route, as we've all said so far.
Yeah, Alycia, I know the other thing to know is that if student athletes in high school are training with these types of substances, and then they are lucky enough to get a scholarship or be able to play at the college level, the NCAA at Division 1, 2, 3 does test for this. So if you think that you're kind of getting away with it, no one's looking, and now you're playing in college, you need to realize that you could be tested and test positive. And that won't be very good for your career or for your team either.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into it. And then there's also that mental dependence on it and thinking that that's going to be the key to your muscle growth or whatnot, but it's really just an added thing to your routine. So natural food is the best route to go just for fueling and recovering. But Dr. Pommering, can you we're going to circle back to the injury aspect of inadequate nutrition. I wanted to ask what other types of injuries, I know you mentioned stress fractures that you see, and then obviously there's menstrual issues. Can you touch how inadequate nutrition causes injuries, and then kind of how that hinders recovery with injuries?
So I think, if you're poorly fueled and poorly rested, I think the injuries are more indirect. In other words, of course, we see bone stress injuries as a more direct result of being amenorrheic or not having a menstrual period or being underfueled. But think about this, a lot of the injuries we see in sports occur late in the contest. So in that last half or last quarter, you're tired, you're fatigued. And if you, on top of the demands of your sport, if you haven't been fueling properly to lead up to that or on the day of the contest, then you're more likely to have slower reaction time. You can't make your body do the things that it's used to doing. And we'll see just more injuries in the fourth quarter. And again, I think, just being poorly fueled it plays a role in that indirectly.
I think that especially with sports like track, we see, especially towards the beginning of the season, those athletes are training a lot, or they are, especially if they hadn't been active in the off season, they start to come in and you start to see things like shin splints, and those can develop into stress fractures. And it's due to now they're increasing their activity load and their intensity, and they are not feeling properly, not getting enough sleep. So it's the whole trifecta of things happening. So how do you recommend them moving forward? Obviously based off of person to person, but how do you kind of have that conversation? If an athlete with shin splints comes into your clinic, how do you kind of go about discussing forward movements with them?
Well, I think, any injury obviously, you're going to get shin splints are a common injury, it's sort of painful anterior shin when you're doing a lot of running, especially at the beginning of your training of your season, or if you're training long and hard. So I think what happens is, we talk about how to treat your injury, but we also spend a fair amount of time how to prevent it from happening again. And so part of that discussion in a lot of patients will be like, well, tell me what your training regimen is like. Tell me what your eating and sleeping regimen is like. And so it sort of opens up a larger conversation. And then when you do find something that's pretty obviously out of sync and it could be improved. I mean, we're just really lucky to have someone like Sakiko to kind of really pick up the ball there and help the athletes and the families too, because the families are a big part of the plan. So she meets with the athlete and the family, and I think that's really helpful.
I do want to add a little bit to that. In terms of nutrition, right? Nutrition can help with injury prevention, but it also can be helpful for injury healing too. Injuries can happen for so many reasons, whether it's nutrition related or not. But when we're injured, right? Our muscles, our bones, something is hurting. And to heal that injury, nutrition can be very, very helpful to help with that healing process.
Yes, thank you guys for touching on that. I think that you guys have given a lot of great information for listeners to hear and absorb. You guys touched on a lot of things that I think that there is some sort of disconnect, and it's just because of lack of not knowing or being told. So I wanted to know, what are some key take homes that parents can be aware of to make sure that their kids are being fueled efficiently?
A tip I like to give to my athletes is make sure you're eating enough, right? Make sure you eat a balanced and variety of food, a balanced diet, making sure you have all kinds of different food groups and a variety of food, and making sure that we eat consistently throughout the day. And a tip that I like to give is the rule of 3 is something I created, making sure we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So those 3 good balanced meals, but also snacking in between meals. For example, mid-morning between breakfast and lunch, or mid-afternoon between lunch and dinner, trying to fuel our body about every 2 to 4 hours. So the rule of 3, making sure you have 3 balanced meals, snack maybe once to twice, 3, or maybe even 4 times a day, by fueling our body about every 2 to 4 hours.
Does it make a difference, the size of each of those meals? So, traditionally here in the United States, dinner's like your big meal. But does it make sense for the big meal of the day to be in the evening like that? Or is that okay?
Yeah. Portion size, it depends on the individual's nutritional needs, right? But typically, I like to encourage athletes to make their breakfast, or the early mid-morning breakfast, lunch, and that mid-morning snack to be a bigger portion of their daily nutritional needs. most athletes are exercising, moving their bodies mid-afternoon or in the evening. And so it makes sense to make sure our body is extra fueled in the morning and make sure that they have that energy for their activity.
And I also wanted to ask you, Sakiko, this is great advice. And obviously, there are a lot of student athletes who can benefit from the services of sports nutrition, especially if we're worried about low energy availability. Is this something that is typically covered with insurance? So, or do folks need a referral, or do you need to prove to the insurance company that I need to see a sports dietitian?
For my nutrition services, you do not need a referral. They can just schedule they can call our Nationwide Children's number and ask for sports nutrition. In terms of insurance, every insurance is a little bit different. So I do encourage parents to contact their insurance and see if a nutrition consultation is covered.
And then if parents do not decide to go to an appointment quite yet, or they're just curious for more knowledge, where can they go to get more information about how to make sure that their child's plate is covered adequately, when to fuel, all the things?
If they feel that they don't need a one-on-one consultation, there's a lot of great nutrition information out there. For example, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, or CPSDA is another great website that they can get general nutrition information there. In terms of my tip, right, making sure your child is getting those balanced meals and snacks throughout the day. If they see signs of underfueling, like their child is constantly tired, exhausted, if they're frequently sick or injured, those could be a sign that, hey, maybe we need to talk to our physician, our doctor, and then consider talking to a dietitian one-on-one.
Thank you. Yes. And obviously this podcast episode is going to be an awesome resource as well for these families to listen to as well. So like I said before, thank you both for being on here and sharing all the knowledge you have about these specific topics under sports nutrition. Dr. Pommering, I kind of wanted to finish up and wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more, or tell the listeners a little bit more about the sports medicine program at Nationwide Children's Hospital.
Yeah, so we operate out of 8 different clinical sites located around the inner and outer belt. Kind of what's coming up new for us that we're excited about is this summer, we will open up a brand new center downtown that will house our colleagues from orthopedics. There'll be a surgery center, an MRI, and there'll be a state-of-the-art rehab and training facility, a really nice place for our adaptive patients to rehab as well. So that'll be in July. And so we hope that people will come visit us. I'm sure there'll be an open house. You don't have to be injured to see us then, but we'll be there if you do get injured. So
I do want to add to that. In terms of sports nutrition services, I have an office in the Dublin and Westerville office, but I also do telehealth consultation as well for those that live a little far from those locations.
Yeah, and we'll put a link to Core Sports Medicine at Nationwide Children's Hospital in the show notes over at PediaCast.org. And then there's also a schedule an appointment page that's specific for sports medicine, and it includes a link for sports nutrition right there on that page. And I'll put a link in the show notes for that too, so folks can find it for this episode 555.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pommering and Sakiko, for being our guests on this episode today. And thank you, Dr. Mike, for letting me be a co-host. It was a great time, and I'm excited that parents and families get to hear this information about sports nutrition.
Yeah, thank you. You did a fantastic job, and we are looking forward to you joining us again in some episodes coming up a little bit later on in the year. And once again, I just want to say thanks to Dr. Tom Pommering and Sakiko Minagawa. Thank you so much, both of you, for stopping by.
great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alycia and Dr. Mike, for having us.
We are back with just enough time to say thanks once again to all of you for taking time out of your day and making PediaCast a part of it. Really do appreciate that. Thank you to our guests this week. Again, Dr. Tom Pommering, Chief of Sports Medicine, and Sakiko Minagawa, Sports Dietitian at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Also, thank you to our guest host this week, our guest co-host, Alycia Kingcade, Certified Athletic Trainer at Nationwide Children's. Don't forget, you can find PediaCast wherever podcasts are found. We're in the Apple and Google podcast apps, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, YouTube, and most other podcast apps for iOS and Android. Our landing site is PediaCast.org. You'll find our entire archive of past programs there, along with show notes for each of the episodes, our terms of use agreement, and that handy contact page if you would like to suggest a future topic for the show. Reviews are helpful wherever you get your podcasts. We always appreciate when you share your thoughts about the show. And we love connecting with you on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, Twitter, X. Simply search for PediaCast. Also, don't forget we have a podcast for pediatric providers. Similar to this program, we turn the science up a couple notches and offer free continuing medical education credit for those who listen. And it's Category 1 credit, so it will most likely count toward your state's CME requirements. And that includes physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses, pharmacists, psychologists, social workers, and dentists. And it's because Nationwide Children's is jointly accredited by all of those professional organizations. That's how we can give that Category 1 continuing education, CE or CME, to you for listening. And it's easy to do. Just head over to PediaCastCME.org. You'll find all the shows there and all the directions for claiming that Category 1 credit. You do want to keep in mind, though, that you'll want the content of the episode to match your scope of practice. Shows and details are available at the landing site for that program, PediaCastCME.org. You can also listen wherever podcasts are found. Simply search for PediaCast CME. Thanks again for stopping by, and until next time, this is Dr. Mike saying stay safe, stay healthy, and stay involved with your kids. So long, everybody.
This program is a production of Nationwide Children's. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on PediaCast.